Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me in this afternoon webinar presented by Drive Green with National Grid. This webinar is Charged Up, everything you need to know about EV charging. And it's really meant for folks that either have electric vehicles and want to learn more about the charging options around them in upstate New York, or if you're considering getting an electric vehicle and want to learn more about how to charge, then this is the webinar for you. Before we get started, and as we're letting folks starting to trickle in and join us, if folks could just send me a message in the questions box letting me know that you can hear me loud and clear, that would be great. In the meantime, I'll talk a little bit about myself. My name is Mouse Goran. I work for a nonprofit organization called Green Energy Consumers Alliance, and our mission is to speed the transition to a low carbon future. So we've partnered up with National Grid in upstate New York to help install electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the state, and also spread awareness about all the benefits there are to switching to an electric car. All right, great, and it looks like the audio is good, so thanks to folks that sent me a message letting me know that you hear me loud and clear. Let's get started. So as I just mentioned, the Drive Green with National Grid program is a program that is trying to make it easier for folks in upstate New York to get an electric car, and especially to lower greenhouse gas levels in the interest of reducing the impact of climate change. So if you're joining me on this webinar today, it's very possible that you found out about this through either a workplace, an apartment building, or a condo that has installed charging, and you're interested in learning a little bit more about that charging station and how to take advantage of going electric and actually using that. So my goal for the webinar today is to talk about everything you'll need to know in order to take advantage of owning an electric vehicle. So here's our agenda. I'll talk a little bit about how charging works on a tech level, just to get some shared common vocabulary. And I'll talk about level 1 and level 2 charging, which refer to two different charging speeds, which is how the majority of EV drivers do their charging. I'll speak a little bit about installing a charging unit at home and what that process is like if you have charging nearby at a workplace or a grocery store or gym and are interested in having it just be that much more convenient for you. I'll talk about public charging networks and how you can find charging stations around you. And then finally, I'll talk about DC fast charging, which is the really high-powered charging that enables long-distance travel in an electric vehicle. And just a couple of housekeeping items. This is an online webinar, but I do want to try and engage you as much as possible. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, I'll be taking regular breaks to answer them. So I encourage participation on that front. And everyone is muted, but if you find yourself unmuted at any point throughout the webinar, just please make sure to turn your microphone off so that we don't get any background. So the two most common questions that I think people ask when they're starting to consider switching to an electric car is how far can the car go on a single charge, how fast it can charge the battery up once it's been depleted. So those are two somewhat related questions that I think help address some of the anxiety that you might be feeling if you're thinking about switching to an electric vehicle, but you're not sure where the technology is at. So that first question, how far can I go, is a question that is really related to the size of the battery, which is measured in kilowatt hours. Kilowatt hours is a unit that we use to describe how much energy is being stored within that battery. So obviously, the bigger battery that you have, the more energy you can store in the car, the further you can go in a single charge. Efficiency also plays a little bit into this question of how many miles you can drive on 100% charge, because more efficient vehicles will be able to use that stored energy to travel further on a single charge than less efficient vehicles. And so another way to think about it is smaller cars tend to be more efficient than bigger cars. And so generally you can go farther on a single charge in a smaller car than a bigger one. The same principle applies to gas-powered cars as well, which is why you see cars like the Prius, the Toyota Prius, can have miles per gallon of as much as 50, whereas pickup trucks are much less efficient. And then finally, the weather actually plays a pretty big role into how far you can go on a single charge. The colder it is, the less efficient the battery will be. And so even on a full charge, you'll be able to travel fewer miles when it's really cold out compared to in the summertime. And actually, right now, autumn is probably a perfect time to be driving an EV because that's when you'll see your maximum range. But the question of how fast can I charge is a slightly different one. And I think that plays into a little bit of the change in lifestyle or convenience that you might think is required to be driving an electric vehicle. Most people are used to going to the gas station and being able to fill up in 5 minutes. And electric vehicles are a little bit different than that. It can take much longer than that to recharge. And there are some trade-offs there that we'll talk about. But the things that affect how fast you can charge is the power source, so where you're plugging into and what kind of outlet you're plugging into. Lots of people choose to charge their electric vehicles exactly like you would charge a smartphone or a laptop, which is using just a regular household outlet and then plugging in. But there are other more higher power sources which you can rely on as well. And the other thing that affects how fast you can charge is actually a device inside the vehicle called an onboard charger. And so what that does is it converts power that's coming from the outlet or the power source from AC power to DC power, which is what is actually stored in the battery. So you can see in the diagram there, anything you do has to be done through that onboard charger to, convert the energy into something that can be stored in the battery. And so that provides like a limiting factor as to how fast you can charge. And that is dependent on every vehicle. So every vehicle has a slightly different charging speed. And then finally, the weather affects charging speed as well. So you'll see faster charging speeds in warmer weather and slower ones in cooler weather. Now, I mentioned that most people, or many people, choose to charge their vehicles exactly like they would any other household device. And that's what's called level 1 charging. So every vehicle, every electric vehicle comes with a cable that you can plug into a regular household outlet, which means that you can refuel your vehicle anywhere there's electricity. So there are 2 standard ports that you can use. That's what the end of the cable looks like. The one on the left is what's called the J1772, and every electric vehicle has this built into the car. So this is standard and universal. The only exception to that is Tesla, which has their own proprietary port that they use. And so those are the 2 different ones. It's one Tesla-specific one, and then the J1772 for everyone else. And I should mention, you get about 4 to 6 miles of range per hour of charging when you're charging the vehicle at this speed. Which again, if you're used to refueling with a gas-powered car, that may seem extremely slow. When a 5 or 10 or 15-minute trip to the gas station can give you hundreds of miles in that time. But the important thing to remember is that level 1 charging really takes advantage of all of the time that cars spend parked in one particular place. So if you think about it, your car is usually sitting at home in your driveway, especially at nighttime. If you are going to the office or going to a workplace, maybe less so now because of COVID, but your car probably usually spends a fair amount of time there too. And the amount of time that it spends driving between those two places or other places is a very small proportion of time. So level 1 charging takes advantage of the fact that cars spend a lot of time in one place. And I should mention as well, I happen to drive an electric vehicle, and this is how I do the majority of my charging. So it's more convenient than you think, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. But most people do want to be able to have a much faster option to charge either at home or at work. And so level 2 charging is that option. Depending on the vehicle, level 2 charging can give you 11 to 25 miles of range per hour of charging, which you'll notice is significantly faster than level 1. The reason that level 2 charging can give you so much more range back per unit of time spent charging is because it requires a specialized charging station unit, which you might refer to as electric vehicle supply equipment, or EVSE. And that's basically just the circuit breaker box that makes sure that the electrical current running through those wires is safe, since it is a little bit more high power than what your typical household appliance would use. The other thing that you need in order to install one of those charging station units is a 240 volt outlet. So that is an outlet that is about double the voltage of a regular household outlet. And you might recognize that as something that you might use to plug a washer or dryer into. So it has that higher voltage, so it's able to supply more power to the car and therefore increase charging speed. There are level 2 stations that you can install at home. If you're joining this webinar from a workplace or a condo that has installed charging, they've installed these level 2 charging stations. And I would say this is how the majority of electric vehicle drivers are charging. In about 8 hours or overnight, you could easily go from 0% to 100% capacity on an electric car. So even if you're driving hundreds of miles in a day regularly, a level 2 charging station could make an electric vehicle possible for you. And you'll see that the 2 ports used for level 2 charging are the exact same as level 1. So you still use the J1772 for all other cars besides Tesla, and then Tesla has their own port. So 11 to 25 miles of range per hour of charging is a pretty big range. But it's worth noting that a lot of the cars that only charge as much as 11 miles of range per hour are plug-in hybrids. Plug-in hybrids are electric vehicles that have both a battery and a gas tank. So you might have some sort of limited range, either 25 to 50 miles of all-electric drive before the battery depletes, and then you shift over to the gas-powered engine. So those vehicles don't charge quite as quickly because the batteries are smaller, and it takes you about 3 or 4 hours to get to a full charge anyway. So you really see a lot of the all-electric vehicles that are available now, including the Nissan Leaf, the Chevy Bolt, the Hyundai Kona, and some of the other ones being able to charge at a minimum of 22 to 24 miles of range per hour, which is pretty standard. And then all the way at the top there, you have the Tesla vehicles, which are more luxury vehicles, more expensive, and you kind of see they do have that additional little boost of performance. They can charge slightly faster because of that luxury status. And all the way on the left there, you'll see onboard charger capacity, which is that component that I had mentioned earlier, which limits the maximum speed of charging. So once you get a little bit more familiar with the numbers, if you already own an electric vehicle or are thinking about it, you'll start to notice that capacity of the onboard charger or the charging station aligns in one of those buckets, and then you can figure out how fast the car charges from there. It is important to note that you can never charge more quickly than either the power that is coming out of the charging station or what the car can accept. So for example, there are different power levels of level 2 charging stations. So if you are driving a car like the Chevy Bolt that can charge as quickly as at 7.2 kilowatts, meaning it has an onboard charger of 7.2 kilowatts, but you plug into a station that has less power than that, and you can only charge as quickly as the station can deliver power. But then on the flip side, if you take that same car and plug it into a more high power station, it's really the car itself that limits how fast you can charge. And so you'd be maxed out at that 7.2 kilowatts of charging speed, which again translates to about 24 miles of range per hour. So again, I recognize that I'm throwing a lot of numbers and units at you, but it is just worth noting that particular piece, because charging stations are all different. They have different powers. They can have different outputs, so it's worth being aware of. And before I move on, I would love to take a quick break for questions if anyone has one. I don't see any coming in just yet, but again, feel free to ask questions as we go, either for clarity or if you think that I haven't covered something that you're wondering about. Okay, great. I'll move on just for now to talk about charging at home and in public and how to take advantage of all the great charging infrastructure that's out there. But don't hesitate to ask questions if you get them. So let's talk a little bit more about electric vehicle supply equipment, or the actual level 2 box that allows you to charge at those higher power speeds. There are literally hundreds of these available charging units that you could be choosing from. And so some of the key considerations that you might be thinking about is how much power do you want the station to deliver, which is the current capacity. So you want to be able to match whatever car you're interested in with the higher power station, because as we just talked about, buying a super high power station for a car that can't accept that won't actually make you charge any faster. Another thing to consider is connectivity, or whether you want to manage or monitor your charging from your smartphone. There are really advanced stations that are a little bit more expensive, but they have features like you can schedule charging according to what times you want to be charging at, or you can see what your car's range is at any given time from your phone. So those features will cost you a little bit extra compared to a unit that's just a plug that you plug in and it goes and it starts charging. So those are some things to consider. And to help you start to answer some of those questions, if you are thinking about charging at home or installing a charging station at home, Green Energy Consumer Alliance has a great guide to help you think about some of those questions and consider whether installing a charging station at home is right for you. It is worth mentioning that the majority of EV drivers charge at home. It's, I think, like 90% or more, because it's just so convenient to be able to plug in when your car is parked, when you're sleeping or when you get home, or especially now if you're working from home. My car has been parked in my driveway for probably 99% of the time, so it is very convenient. And so this guide will help you figure out exactly what you would need to do in order to make that happen. And it does typically cost between $600 and $1,200 for the purchase and installation of one of these charging units, including the electrician's labor, which may sound like a lot, But one of the benefits of switching to an electric car is the fact that you will see substantial fuel savings by ditching gasoline. So it would cost about $5.50 to drive 100 miles in an electric vehicle, which is substantially less than any gas-powered car, even with the really low gas prices that we've been seeing because of COVID. Another way to be thinking about this is what's called an e-gallon, which is a comparison of the cost of gasoline to how far you could go in an electric vehicle, considering the electricity prices in New York. So you can see that even with record low gas prices, electric e-gallons or driving an electric car provides you with substantial savings. And you can imagine that as the price of gas goes back up again, you'll just see even more of those savings. In general, EV drivers can expect to pay half as much in fuel compared to gasoline-powered car drivers. But again, that depends on the price of gasoline. One additional benefit of switching to an electric car compared to a gasoline-powered car is that electricity rates are really regulated, so they don't change very often. And there are regulatory bodies in New York and in every state to make sure that electricity prices remain fair. On the other hand, the price of gasoline is dependent on the worldwide market for oil. So we don't really have control over what the price of gasoline is. And that volatility and uncertainty makes it really hard to budget to think about how much you're going to be spending in gasoline over a long period of time. So with an electric car, when you're charging at home, the costs are extremely predictable, and they remain that way for a long period of time. And so the question is not whether you're going to save by switching to an electric car, it's how much you're going to save. And of course, the more you drive, the more savings you'll see by making that switch. So the Drive Green with National Grid program does have some additional resources to help you figure out exactly how much you would save, considering the car that you're driving now and how many miles you typically drive. And I'll share those resources at the end of this. There is an additional opportunity to make charging even cheaper for folks that are in the upstate New York region. National Grid has special rates for EV drivers to make charging cheaper when you're plugged in between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. So the justification for that is that nighttime is the lowest demand time for electricity. So when EV drivers choose to plug in at night when they're sleeping, instead of 4 or 5 or 6 p.m. when everyone is up and using the most electricity, that provides additional grid benefits that are now being returned to EV drivers with this rate. So again, how much you could potentially save depends on whether you are able to shift your charging times between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. But the average household, as noted there, is estimated to save about $175 per year. And that's on top of those additional savings just because electricity is cheaper than gasoline. So I'll be sharing these slides so that you can access these resources and links. And I'll share the recording as well. But you can learn more about that option at the National Grid website. The majority of EV drivers are doing their charging at home, but there are quite a lot of people that choose to rely on the public charging infrastructure that's available when it's convenient, or if you can't easily install charging at home. So for example, if you're a renter or have some other limitation that makes it hard to install charging for where you keep your car. So you can really think of the public level 2 charging network as a supplement to whatever charging you would be doing at home or at work when your car is parked for the majority of the time. I have on the screen there a map, a really broad map of the upstate New York area, and you can see the dozens of charging stations that are available. And this map is interactive on a tool called PlugShare. So as you zoom into specific areas, more stations pop up. But I think this is a pretty good visualization of where you can expect to get charging. I'll note that the green icons on the map are level 2 stations, and the orange ones are DC fast charging, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides. But it is really important to check out maps like this as you're thinking about getting an electric car, because it helps you become aware of the resources to charge around you that you might not necessarily notice. So if you think about a gas station, they are extremely visible. They have huge signage. You kind of can't miss them if you're driving around. But charging stations are often hidden in parking lots or in huge areas where people leave their cars. And if you don't know what to look for, you might mistake one for a parking meter or some other type of infrastructure that you wouldn't really notice or pay attention to. So using interactive maps like PlugShare can help you figure out what's near you and help you start to pay attention so that you can see, like, wow, there actually is a lot of charging around me, and to even help you find charging stations in destinations that you're traveling to. And there are different types of charging networks, which I'll talk about now. These different networks are all included on the PlugShare app, so you can see them all and see what's around you. But they're basically just different companies that have these different networks of charging stations. And so depending on where you live and what's available around you, you do have to download a particular app in order to, either pay for the charging that you use or just see what's available around you. But once you get a sense of what the dominant network is around where you live, then you can kind of download these tools as you go or as it's convenient for you. And a note about cost is that you might be surprised to hear that a lot of the stations that are public are actually free to use, which means that you might pay for parking if it's some sort of shopping area or tourist destination, or someplace that you might pay for parking. But a lot of the charging is free, so if you're going to pay for parking anyway, it's kind of a great deal to be able to plug your car in and get a couple of miles. But there are also a lot of stations that are available free of charge and in places where you don't have to pay for parking at all. So the different phone-based or app-based tools can help you identify what you would be paying for a particular station before you even get there. So these charging networks can help you see what's in your area. You can know exactly how much you'll be paying before you get there. You can see, you can get a notification when your charging is done. So they are really quite intuitive to use and provide you with a lot of information. And I always think it's most helpful to just see an example of how this might be used. So say you were going out of your way to take a trip from Syracuse to Niagara Falls. Again, maybe not around this time because of COVID, but just suppose you were making this drive. So that's about 163 miles, which is well within the range of many of the all-electric vehicles that are available on the market today. But at some point, you would want to charge up to make sure that you can get back to Syracuse, without having to stop to charge. And so if you are planning on spending a day in Niagara Falls and you want to check out the charging infrastructure that's there, then you would just use the PlugShare app and then go to the area. You type in the area that you're going to, and automatically the map pops up with all of the different options that you have. So in this case, you can see the little screen capture on the left there is straight from the PlugShare app, and it tells you the address of the charging station, and it'll direct you there. It'll tell you whether you need to pay for parking. It'll tell you the hours that it's open, what else is in that area. It tells you what type of plug and what type of charging network it is. You can see in this case, it's a J1772 port. So that would fit in with every electric vehicle that's available on the market now. And that it's a charge point station. So then at that point, you could also, switch over to the ChargePoint app, which is from the screen share on the right there, and then see the power of the stations, whether you have to pay for them, when they're open, all that information. So, before you even leave, you can drive to your destination knowing that you have a place to charge once you arrive. And the great thing is that once you get there, you're most likely, if you're taking a trip or going somewhere, you're going to keep your car parked, in one place for a while, right? So say you get to your destination, you get to Niagara Falls, you decide to take a walk, you decide to get some dinner, you maybe, want to visit someone, whatever you're going to do there, you could recharge the vehicle without having to make an additional stop. So this is the real benefit of being able to switch to an electric car, is that instead of making that 10 or 15 minute detour to drop by a gas station, you don't really have to add any additional steps except for the planning at the very beginning. And again, you're getting those 163 miles back for free if you decide to stop at one of these charging stations, because these destination stations are often free or very low cost. So you have a lot of this information at your disposal, and it is a bit of an adjustment. It's different from getting gas, but definitely can be as convenient and save you money in the long term. So I recommend, if you are really considering getting an electric car, just thinking about places that you often drive to or go to, and checking out the charging infrastructure that's available in those places, using PlugShare or ChargePoint or some other charging network, to see how convenient it can be for you. You might be surprised about that. Up next, I'll talk about fast charging, but I do just want to point out this photo in the background that's on the screen there is something that I took directly from the PlugShare app. So it is kind of cool. People upload exactly what the station looks like and where it is, in order to help other people find it. So it's a social tool as well, and there's a lot of great information on there. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I still don't see any questions, so I will go ahead and keep going, because fast charging is really the technology that makes those extremely long drives possible in an electric vehicle. They might not happen very often. I think that in general, people don't drive hundreds of miles in a day with regularity, but DC fast charging is the fastest possible way to charge, and it'll help you do exactly that if you're taking the occasional vacation or whatever it is. So the first thing to note is that DC fast charging uses some slightly different ports than level 1 or level 2 charging. So the first one that I'll start with is the J1772 combo, all the way on the top right there. And you'll notice the same circle top part is the same as the J1772 that's standard on all electric vehicles. But to be able to DC fast charge, you need those 2 additional pins at the bottom there, that bottom section. and not all electric vehicles come standard with that feature. So if you know that DC fast charging is something you would want in a vehicle, then you just have to make sure that you have the full package there, and not just the standard charging point. Some Asian-made vehicles, so for example, the Nissan Leaf or the Mitsubishi Outlander, have what's called a CHAdeMO port for DC fast charging, and that is a second additional port that would be alongside the J1772. And so that port is actually not going to be the standard anymore. They're going to phase that out for vehicles sold in North America. So pretty soon you won't see any vehicles with the CHAdeMO port, but that is something to be aware of if you are thinking about getting a Nissan Leaf, is that it has this port that will not be used in the future. And then finally, Tesla has its own port that it uses for all three levels of charging. And so the way that DC fast charging is able to kind of bypass the limitations that we have with level 1 and level 2 charging is because at a DC fast charging station, the electricity coming out of the cable is already in a format that can be stored in the battery. So unlike electricity that comes from a regular household outlet, you don't need to make any changes or do anything to it to make sure that it can be stored in the battery. So you're able to bypass some of those limitations, which makes charging much, much faster. Once you get to fast charging speeds, the only thing that really limits how fast you can charge is the car's battery management system, and that exists to make sure that the car doesn't overheat or do any damage to the battery as it's accepting this high power electricity from the DC fast charging unit. And so this chart, I think, is helpful to get a sense of what you can expect in terms of DC fast charging for different vehicles, because, you know, much like with a lot of the electric vehicle technology that's available, it is changing very rapidly. And so we see all sorts of different speeds. The Chevy Bolt, for example, which has been a popular car for many years, can only charge as quickly as about 90 miles in 30 minutes of a DC fast charging session. Whereas you look at, you know, the Kia Niro or Hyundai Kona, it does a little bit better than that, around 110 or 115 miles in 30 minutes. And then you have other vehicles, particularly, you know, vehicles that are luxury status where you can charge much, much faster. It is important to note that as the technology improves and gets more cost effective, I think charging at really high speeds is going to be the standard. And there are charging networks that are installing stations that can put out 350 kilowatts of power, even though very few cars can actually charge at that speed, because they anticipate that that's where the technology is going. So, you know, for those long road trips, DC fast charging will be made more and more convenient. And I've put this chart together based off of the different reports that vehicle manufacturers put out about their cars. But they all report these values in different ways. So, for example, the Kia Niro or Hyundai Kona might report it as 80% charge in 54 minutes, or the Chevy Bolt says 90 miles in 30 minutes. And they all just kind of have different ways of representing that information. But here's like a good apples to apples way of comparing what the different capability of different cars actually is. And again, all of these charge times will vary based on the state of charge in the vehicle. So plugging in at 0% is very different from plugging in at 40% from the perspective of the battery. So you'll see different speeds there. And you'll also see different charging speeds according to weather and some other factors. Or even, the fast charging power capability of the station itself. So this is a good guideline, but it takes some practice to figure out exactly what you can expect from your own car in any particular situation. And I will just mention before I get to this last point here, that DC fast charging, because it's meant to support you on long road trips, does tend to be a little bit more expensive or just not free compared to level 2 charging stations. And so you typically will see a cost there that is more similar to what you would pay for gas. So some of the fuel benefits or some of the cost saving benefits are not as apparent if you need to use DC fast charging to support you on a long road trip. And that's just because DC fast charging is really meant to be like you use it once in a while, but we're seeing time and time again with EV drivers that are out there already, the majority of people are choosing to charge at home, at work, at slower speeds because it meets all of their needs without incurring those higher costs. And we've also seen from EV drivers that charging, if you think about it, can be more convenient than gas because instead of having to make these separate stops regularly where you need to refuel and if you forget to refuel, then you have to go in the morning before you go to work or whatever it is. It's an additional errand that you have to run. Whereas charging is something that is quick to do and you're doing it from places where you're already parked. So considering the fact that it costs less, you don't need to make additional stops in order to do it, and that it's actually quite easy and takes just 5 seconds to take the cable and plug it into the vehicle. Folks are finding that once you kind of shift your thinking about it, it fits into a lot of people's lifestyles without any major changes at all. So that is the end of my presentation. I know I went through a lot of information, so thank you for your attention here. And whether you found this webinar because of nearby charging and it was recommended to you, or whether you're starting to consider getting an electric vehicle, I really encourage you to use the resources at drivegreen.nationalgridus.com/learn because that'll help you answer some of the additional questions that you might have about the different models that are available, or how to calculate what you would save by switching to an electric car on your own, or just some of the other questions that you have. So that's a great place to poke around and answer the questions you might have. But sometimes it's easier just to talk to a person and get an answer directly on something. So feel free to email drivegreeny@greenenergyconsumers.org as well, so that I can answer any additional questions that you might have about electric cars after this webinar, whether they're related to charging or not. So I have plenty of answers for the questions that you have. And I'd love to take some time to answer questions, but it seems like the group is quiet today. So I can stay on the line and answer any additional questions that come in if folks are processing the information and just need a second to collect their thoughts. But again, that is the end of my presentation. And so if you don't have any questions, then feel free to log off. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. This is really great to be able to talk and chat about the benefits of EVs. And I will be sharing this recording and the slides after I log off.